The castle is never truly asleep, though it pretends well enough for children. The torches gutter low, the draughts soften to sighs, and even the portraits grow drowsy in their frames. The black lake presses its cool palm against the windows, and the silver bodies of passing creatures drift like thoughts I do not care to finish. Night is the only hour when the corridors cease their endless whispering of gossip and footsteps. I move through the dungeons with a lantern held low, its light bending around the arches like something reluctant to be seen. The air smells of damp stone and old magic, sharp as crushed nettles. Shelves of bottled curiosities glimmer faintly as I pass, their contents suspended in patient silence. They, at least, understand stillness. They do not ask questions. Above me, in their towers and four-poster beds, the students dream. I imagine their sleep as a tide, rising and falling, carrying them through harmless adventures their waking minds would never dare. Some will dream of triumphs, Quidditch catches made at impossible angles, examinations mastered with casual brilliance. Others will wander uneasy landscapes shaped by homesickness or fear of failure. It is strange to think that I, who guard these halls with such vigilance, walk unseen along the shores of those private seas. My footsteps trace paths worn by generations, and I feel their echoes stir underfoot. Here a laugh once rang bright. There a sob was swallowed before it could be heard. I know these stones as one knows the lines of an old scar. They are faithful. In their cold endurance, I find a kind of companionship. There are moments in the deepest part of night when the boundary between past and present thins like mist, brushes against me as I catalogue ingredients or mark essays in a precise, unforgiving hand. Regret is a patient tutor, yet even I am not immune to gentler recollections. A fragment of laughter, bright as a falling star, sometimes pierces the dark. They soften the edges I have so carefully honed, and still, on nights like this, I allow them to surface briefly, as one might permit a candle to burn low before pinching it out. The castle settles deeper into its slumber, and even the restless suits of armor stand quiet. I pause at the foot of the stairs that spiral upward toward the sleeping students. It is enough that the wards hold, that the doors remain sealed, that no harm slips through the cracks of ancient walls. At last I return to my chambers. The lake's murmur is softer now, a lullaby sung in a language older than magic. Tomorrow will demand severity, precision, and the careful maintenance of distance. But for this brief span between waking and sleep, I allow myself the fragile indulgence of rest. Sleep does not claim me so much as it studies me, wary and exacting. I lie in the narrow bed as the lake presses its shifting weight against the glass, and I feel the castle turn upon its ancient foundations. The darkness behind my eyes is not empty. It is crowded with impressions, half-formed thoughts steeped too long in memory. Even at rest, my mind inventories threats the way others count sheep. The wards hum faintly in the marrow of the stone. I have attuned myself to their song over the years, to the subtle tremor that would signal intrusion. I imagine it threading upward through the staircases and corridors, winding around sleeping forms, sealing windows and keyholes with invisible resolve. It is a craft of quiet layers, of vigilance performed without witness. There is a particular stillness that comes only after midnight, when even the most stubborn dreamers surrender to deeper currents. Dust motes settle like exhausted dancers in abandoned ballrooms. I drift at the edge of true sleep and find myself walking not through corridors, but through recollection, a narrow street beneath a sallow sky. A childhood spent measuring the distance between raised voices. The first taste of magic, sharp and intoxicating, like lightning caught in the mouth. Such memories rise unbidden, but they no longer possess the power to unmake me. There are other recollections I approach more cautiously. A friendship kindled in shared wonder, a rivalry sharpened into cruelty, a choice uttered in arrogance and sealed in ignorance. These move through my thoughts like phantoms beneath the lake's surface, visible only when the light strikes at a certain angle. Regret accompanies them, but so too does resolve. It is a series of quiet refusals to fail again. Somewhere above, a student turns in sleep. I feel it as a ripple through the wards, a harmless shift. I wonder what occupies their dreaming mind. Perhaps they do not think of war or consequence, or the brittle line between loyalty and betrayal. I would not wish such burdens upon them yet. A single image persists, bright eyes, unguarded, reflecting a world that once seemed wide with possibility. I have learned that some tenderness is best observed from a distance, lest it erode the discipline I require to endure. The ward's hum recedes into something softer, almost melodic. No accusations echo there, no laughter cuts sharp as glass, only quiet and the faint scent of extinguished candles. When dawn comes, and it always comes, I will rise, don my habitual severity like armor, and resume my post within corridors that demand it. But for now, in the hush between heartbeats, I allow the castle to cradle me as it does its children. Dawn approaches with a reluctance I understand. It must first filter through the lake, thinning the darkness into a murky gray. I sense the change before I see it. For a suspended instant, I do not recall where memory left me in the night. Then it settles back into place, precise and familiar. The imagined quiet of the great hall dissolves. Stone returns. Water presses close. The weight of obligation resumes its measured seat upon my chest. The corridor beyond my chambers is cool and faintly silvered by the first diluted light. Soon there will be the thunder of feet on staircases, the echo of chatter ricocheting off vaulted ceilings, the clatter of cutlery beneath a sky enchanted to mimic morning, youth announcing itself in 100 careless ways. Habit is its own safeguard. Preachers drift away from the glass, retreating to whatever depths shelter them from the day. Above, the first doors open. There is no place for hesitation in the daylight hours. It is easier to be the figure they expect than to risk the fracture of something more complicated. The castle does not stand by stone alone, but by choice, by countless decisions made in moments unseen. To watch, to wait, to intervene only when required, dissolve in the last constellations of night. They do not notice the careful sweep of my gaze, nor the brief tally I take of faces present and accounted for. For an instant, sunlight pierces a high window and strikes the flagstones near my feet. It is an unremarkable thing, light, yet it exists, persistent and indifferent to regret. The day will unfold as it always does. Instructions given, mistakes corrected, points deducted with clinical precision. Beneath it all, the vigil continues, unspoken and unwavering. Night will return in its time, and with it the gentler illusions that make endurance possible. A sentinel between harm and the unknowing. You are still awake. I can feel it in the subtle disturbance of the air, in the faint glow that does not belong to candle or wand light. The castle has long since surrendered to night again, and yet there is a different sort of wakefulness threading through the dark quieter, distant, as though someone beyond these walls listens from beneath their own blankets. If you insist upon lingering, then lie still and attend carefully. Hogwarts has little patience for restless minds. The torches have burned low. The Hogwarts corridors stretch in patient silence, stones steeped in 1,000 years of secret. Few who wander them understand how much of the past presses close at night. The founders themselves shaped these halls with intention. Salazar Slytherin carved his legacy into the very plumbing of the castle, a secret chamber coiled like a serpent beneath unsuspecting feet. Godric Gryffindor left courage embedded in banners and blade. Rowena Ravenclaw wove intellect into the moving staircases, and Helga Hufflepuff sealed loyalty into kitchens warm with unseen labor. Their magic lingers, subtle as breath on glass. You would not survive a single hour here without the protections layered into these stones. I walk the perimeter as I always do. The wards hum beneath my skin, attuned to my presence, as they once attuned themselves to Albus Dumbledore. He understood the necessity of watchfulness. He also understood the cost. There are portraits in this castle that remember wars most students cannot imagine. They remember when Grindelwald's shadow stretched long across Europe. They remember when a darker name began to circulate in whispers among frightened families. You know the name. It coils even now at the back of your thoughts, like a half-remembered nightmare. Lord Voldemort did not simply wage war with spells and followers. He weaponized fear. He fractured trust. He made children grow old before their time. The first war ended in a flash of green light and a ruin in Godric's Hollow. But wars have a way of leaving fragments behind, splinters of soul hidden in objects, in memory, in men. Yes, in men. You shift beneath your covers as you listen, perhaps imagining dungeons slick with lake-water shadow. You are not entirely wrong. The black lake presses against my windows as though it, too, listens. The giant squid drifts past from time to time, an ancient sentinel in its own right. The merpeople sing in the depths when they believe no wizard hears them. Hogwarts is not merely stone and staircase. It is treaty and truce, promise and penance. There are corridors here that remember footsteps I would rather forget. The path to the astronomy tower, the stretch of flagstone outside the hospital wing, the narrow road leading to the shrieking shack, knotted with the reckless arrogance of youth. I was not always the figure you picture pacing with robes snapping like bat wings. Once I stood on the periphery of brighter circles drawn to brilliance, repelled by cruelty, yet capable of it all the same. You expect monsters to know they are monsters. It is rarely so tidy. The castle clock marks another hour. Somewhere above, a student murmurs in sleep. Perhaps you imagine it is you safe beneath enchanted rafters, unaware of how many times danger has been diverted before it reached your bed. A cursed object intercepted, a suspicious letter confiscated, a corridor patrolled twice instead of once. Protection is most effective when it goes unnoticed. If you wake untroubled, it is because someone remained troubled in your stead. I pause beside a window where moonlight filters through the lake in fractured beams. Silver ripples across the ceiling like an echo of the enchanted sky in the great hall. There was a night not so long ago, though it feels carved from another lifetime, when the castle's defenses were tested beyond their limits. When Death Eaters breached these grounds under a sky split by lightning. When the astronomy tower bore witness to a bargain fulfilled at terrible cost. Fragments of that story. You have heard it told in brighter tones, centered upon heroes easier to love. History is selective. There are vows made in desperation that bind tighter than chains. There are promises sworn before ancient magic that demand fulfillment regardless of personal ruin. An unbreakable vow does not concern itself with comfort. It recognizes only completion. And so a man may walk a path that appears treacherous from the outside, while believing foolishly or not that each step is necessary. You are very quiet now. Good. The castle prefers reverence after midnight. Even Peeves grows subdued in these hours, though chaos is stitched into his incorporeal bones. The suits of armor stand sentinel along the staircases. The fat lady dozes within her frame. In the deepest dungeon classroom, cauldrons sit scrubbed and inverted, as harmless as teacups. By day they bubble with volatile concoctions draught of living death. Veritaserum, polyjuice, potion, 𝗕𝗲𝗄, capable of altering fate in careless hands. Magic is neither benevolent nor malevolent. It is intent given form. Remember that, as you lie there with your borrowed glow and distant music humming faintly in your ears. You consume stories of this place as though they are safely contained between covers or speakers. But Hogwarts was never merely a story. It is a crucible. It tempers the gifted and exposes the weak seams in the arrogant. It shelters and it tests. I resume my pacing. The hem of my robes whispers against stone, a metronome for your sleepless thoughts. You imagine I do not know you are listening. On the contrary, I count on it. Every sentinel requires a witness, even if that witness exists beyond the boundaries of parchment and spellcraft. You listen. Therefore, the vigil is not entirely solitary. The night deepens toward that fragile hour before dawn when the world seems suspended between breaths. If you close your eyes now, you might almost feel the castle breathing with you. In hell the lake swells dark against the glass. Exhale, the wards settle, steady and unbroken. Somewhere in a forbidden forest, a centaur lifts his gaze to the wheeling stars, reading portents in their indifferent blaze. No prophecy stirs tonight. No green light fractures the dark. Only the quiet persistence of watchfulness endures. And you, still awake, are permitted this glimpse behind the curtain of severity. Not absolution, not explanation, merely context. The knowledge that beneath the austere lines and measured disdain stands a figure who chose again and again remain where the danger was thickest. The torches will rekindle soon enough. Dawn will seep pale and unwelcome through the lake. Students will rise, oblivious and alive, and the performance will resume. Points will be deducted, instructions will be delivered with cutting precision. The sentinel will wear his shadows as armor, but for now, lie back. Let the castle keep you. Let the lake's muffled lullaby draw your thoughts downward into gentler currents. I am still here. And as long as these stones stand, the night will find me walking them quiet as regret, constant as devotion, and far more awake than I ever permit the daylight to see. The wind came shrieking down from the mountains and hurled itself against Hogwarts, as though it meant to test the resolve of its founders. Even the black lake moved sluggishly, its surface crusted with brittle ice that cracked like distant applause. I remember that night with particular clarity. The students had been sent to their dormitories early, fires stoked high in common rooms, prefects instructed to keep order. Rumors had been drifting through the corridors, all weak rumors of movement beyond the gates, of cloaked figures seen at the edge of the forbidden forest, of the dark mark flickering miles away over an unfortunate household. Fear spreads quickly in a school. It requires no wand. Suits of armor trembled faintly as the wind bullied the walls. They shimmered faintly, blue to my sight, thin as spun glass, in places where older magic had begun to fray. It is a peculiar burden to guard those who do not trust you. A group of Slytherin third years had lingered after supper, their bravado cracking around the edges. They asked oblique questions about defensive enchantments, about how quickly help might arrive if the worst occur. I saw the way their hands trembled as they gathered their books. The headmaster's office remained lit. Albus Dumbledore had been uncharacteristically silent that week. His silence is heavier than pronouncements. He trusted me with more than most would consider wise. Perhaps he saw utility. Perhaps he saw penance. Perhaps he simply understood that a man who has walked willingly into darkness can recognize its footfall at a distance. Near midnight, the wards shifted. It was not a collapse, nor even a breach. It was a pressured, deliberate, probing, like a finger tracing the seam of a door. The signature brushing our defenses was old, coiled with malice and exquisite patience. His followers were adept enough at testing boundaries, eager enough to please. I ascended from the dungeons with purpose, robes snapping behind me, a few whispered warnings along their frames. On the third-floor corridor overlooking the grounds, frost had crept along the interior stones in delicate fern patterns. I placed my palm against the wall and let my magic unfurl not in spectacle, but in precision. Layer upon layer, I reinforced what the founders had woven. Rowena Ravenclaw's logic in the lattice work, Helga Hufflepuff's steady fortification in the mortar, Godric Gryffindor's defiant spark at the threshold, and deep below, Salazar Slytherin's serpentine, cunning, binding hidden passages shut. The pressure outside recoiled, not defeated, merely informed. For a long moment, snow swirled violently against the barriers, outlining them in ghostly relief. I could almost discern shadowed figures at the tree line, their outlines blurred by storm and distance. They would not attack outright, not yet. This was reconnaissance, intimidation, the promise of future violence. Behind me, I sensed, rather than heard, another presence. The forest quieted. The storm exhausted itself against the mountain slopes. By 2 in the morning, the castle had resumed its brittle stillness. I remained at the window long after the threat withdrew. A girl in Ravenclaw muttered lines from a textbook even in slumber. That is the nature of guardianship. You do not wake them. You do not tell them how close it came. The great hall ceiling mirrored a pale winter sky. Owls swooped in with the morning post, indifferent to the night's tension. This one remains because it was quiet, because the line held, because no child woke screaming to the sound of shattering wards. You might feel the faint tremor of magic bracing itself against intrusion, in unseen resistance, in the steady hand pressed to freezing stone. The castle remembers that winter, and those of us who have bound ourselves to a place such as this, we recall most of all. Tell me, are you still awake? You must be. I can almost sense the faint hum of whatever Muggle contrivance carries my voice to you. A narrow bed beneath a slanted ceiling. A city apartment washed in sodium light. Simply consider it. The idea that my words travel beyond these dungeon walls would have seemed absurd to the boy I once was. There was another night. Students had been evacuated in hurried waves, younger ones clutching hands, older ones feigning bravery with pale faces. In those hours, allegiances were masks worn thin. Beyond the broad strokes of betrayal and revelation. But stories simplify what living complicates. There is only calculation, timing, the relentless awareness that a single misstep may cost lives, measured in children, not soldiers. The forbidden forest was restless. Somewhere in the distance, a signal flared briefly against the clouds and vanished. Are you listening from somewhere warm? It was a night of divided loyalties, of eyes watching me for signs of treachery while I performed a role so thoroughly that even allies doubted. To deceive one of the most accomplished Legulemans in history requires more than occlusion. I remember pausing outside the headmaster's office. No, not Dumbledore's, another's. The gargoyle did not yield to me as readily in those days. Authority had shifted, and with it the very temperament of the castle. The portraits along the walls were subdued. Some turned deliberately away in silent protest. The silver instruments within the office had fallen quiet, as though unwilling to participate in what was unfolding. And I stood there, aware that history was pivoting on decisions made in whispers. Tell me, do you ever consider how close your own life has come to altering irrevocably, the roads not taken? It is easy to believe destiny is a straight corridor. It is not. It is a shifting staircase, and sometimes it moves beneath your feet without warning. The very air seemed to scream. Yet threaded through that chaos were smaller moments. A shield charm cast just in time to deflect a curse from a fallen student. A warning murmured where none expected it. Of the silhouette of a man framed perpetually in torchlight. Or perhaps you do. Perhaps that is why you are still awake, listening. Others linger only in memory. And I remain here in recollection, walking you through it. So I ask again, more quietly, Noir, you still awake? Has sleep begun to tug at the edges of your thoughts? If, however, you persist, if you lie there with the faint glow lighting your ceiling, then stay with me a while longer. The night is deep, and there are still corridors left to walk. The aftermath is never as loud as the battle. That is a truth rarely spoken. When the spells have ceased their violent crossing and the cries have dwindled into stunned quiet, there comes a stillness far heavier than noise. Hogwarts wore that stillness like a shroud. Smoke clung to the rafters of the great hall. Rubble lay scattered across corridors, once polished to a dull sheen by centuries of passing feet. The enchanted ceiling reflected not stars nor storm, but a pale and exhausted dawn. I walked those corridors when others could not yet bear to. It has always been easier for me to move among ruins. Stone split by curses does not recoil from my presence. Burned tapestries do not whisper about loyalties. The castle's wounds were visible, shattered balustrades, cracked suits of armor, scorch marks spiraling up the walls. Yet beneath the damage, the ancient magic endured. The wards, though strained, still hummed faintly, as if astonished at their own survival. In the courtyard, frost had settled into the crevices left by fallen giants. The air smelled of ash and damp earth. Survivors moved in clusters, speaking in hushed tones, their faces altered by what they had seen. Some bore bandages, others bore a different kind of injury, the sort that does not announce itself so plainly. The young, who had once feared examinations and Quidditch defeats, now carried knowledge far heavier. War accelerates the erosion of innocence. You, listening from the safety of your own room, cannot quite feel the texture of that morning, the grit beneath one's boots, the ringing in the ears that persists long after curses stop flying, the way sunlight seems almost indecent in its brightness, daring to illuminate what has been broken. Yet perhaps you know another version of aftermath in your own life, quieter, smaller in scale, but no less transformative. A conversation that altered everything. A loss that divided time into before and after. 𝗕𝗲𝗄𝗃 rebuilt itself slowly. Magic assisted, of course. Shattered stone can be coaxed back into form, and broken beams persuaded to knit together. But restoration is not the same as erasure. There are corridors that, even now, carry a subtle chill where certain spells struck hardest. The forbidden forest remains wary. The Black Lake reflects the towers as faithfully as ever, yet I sometimes imagine it remembers the flashes of green light that once stained its surface. In those days of reconstruction, I resumed teaching, as though routine alone might anchor the drifting remnants of normalcy. Cauldrons bubbled once more in the dungeon classroom. Ingredients were measured with trembling but determined hands. Students glanced at me differently, though few could articulate why. Authority forged in crises has a different tenor than authority derived from position. They had seen enough to understand that a protection does not always wear a kindly face. I did not soften. That would have been dishonest. Severity remained my instrument, precision my language. Yet they were nearly imperceptible when I allowed instruction to extend half a breath longer than necessary, when I corrected with slightly less bite. Not mercy, precisely, but recognition. They had stood in the line of fire. They had earned the dignity of competence. At night, when the castle settled once more into its ancient rhythms, I continued my solitary circuits. The wards required recalibration. New enchantments were laid atop old foundations. The legacy of Salazar Slytherin still wound through hidden chambers, and the courage of Godric Gryffindor lingered in the stones of the courtyard where students had made their stand. Rowena Ravenclaw's quiet intellect guided the restoration of fractured towers, while Helga Hufflepuff's enduring patience seemed present in every repaired threshold. History did not conclude with victory. It rarely does. It settles instead into memory, into policy, into the cautious vigilance of those who remain. Perhaps you feel sleep tugging at you now. The hour is late, wherever you are. The world beyond your walls continues in its own indifferent motion. Yet here, within these imagined corridors, the castle stands restored, but not unchanged, and I remain at my post not as martyr, nor as misunderstood villain, but as something less easily defined. If you carry anything from these wanderings through stone and shadow, let it be this: endurance is not always luminous. It does not always announce itself with banners and applause. Sometimes it is simply the decision to walk the perimeter again, to reinforce what was damaged, to teach another class, to stand guard one more night. Years pass differently within a castle such as this. Seasons wheel across the Scottish hills. Snow gives way to thaw, thaw to green, green to gold. And still Hogwarts endures altered in detail, unchanged in essence. New students arrive with trunks too large for their frames and fears they attempt to disguise as indifference. They do not remember the war except as story. They speak of it the way children speak of storms that happened before they were born. I observe them from the high table, fingers steepled, expression unreadable. It is remarkable how quickly history becomes anecdote. A battle that once shook these walls now survives in textbook paragraphs and whispered embellishments. Names that were spoken in dread are recited in essays. Even Lord Voldemort has begun to fade into abstraction for some, no longer a presence that tightened throats, but a chapter heading. This is as it should be. Terror should not be heirloom. And yet, memory serves a purpose. The castle itself ensures it. There are places where portraits quietly recount what they witnessed. The headmaster's office, once occupied by Albus Dumbledore, holds more than silver instruments and sleeping portraits. It holds the weight of decisions that shaped the fate of all who study beneath its tower. I sometimes stand there after hours, when even the staircases seem reluctant to move, and consider the peculiar architecture of trust that defined those years. Trust is not blind faith. It is measured risk. You, listening from wherever you are, perhaps older now than when you began this nocturnal wandering, understand that better than you once did. Trust is the decision to place something fragile into uncertain hands and hope it is not crushed. Dumbledore placed such trust in me. Whether that trust was wisdom or folly remains a matter for philosophers and ghosts. Purr in the dungeons. Life resumes its familiar cadence. First years wrinkle their noses at the scent of crushed lacewing fly. Seventh years attempt complex brews with an anxiety they mistake for confidence. I move between desks, correcting grip and timing, deducting points with clinical fairness. They see only the surface, the black robes, the cutting tone, the relentless expectation of excellence. They do not see the subtler vigilance. I notice which student flinches at sudden noises, which one lingers too long over the mention of unforgivable curses in the margins of their text, which owl brings letters that remain unopened for days. The aftermath of conflict does not vanish with reconstruction. It seeps into the next generation in quieter ways. My task is no longer solely to guard against external threat, but to ensure that fear does not calcify into something darker within these young minds. Outside, the forbidden forest grows thick again. Centaurs resume their cow readings. The black lake reflects the towers with deceptive tranquility. The whomping willow thrashes less violently these days, as though age has tempered even its temper. The grounds appear peaceful to any casual observer. But peace is not the absence of vigilance. It is its reward. At night, when the castle settles and the enchanted ceiling dims to a scatter of patient stars, I continue my solitary circuits, not because danger presses constantly at the gates, but because constancy itself is a safeguard. The wards hum, layered with old magic and newer refinements. I have added my own signatures to them over the years, subtle calibrations, adjustments born of experience. The founder's legacy remains intact, but it has been updated. Perhaps you wonder whether such watchfulness grows weary. It does. There are evenings when the weight of memory presses heavier than any external threat. When I pause beside a window overlooking the grounds and see not the present tranquillity, but echoes superimposed upon it, flashes of spell-light, figures moving through smoke. Time folds strangely in places steeped in magic, and yet I do not regret remaining. Regret is reserved for choices that cannot be mended. This continued guardianship's not penance alone. It is preference. The castle, in its austere way, has become something like home. Its stones do not demand explanations. Its corridors do not require confession. They accept presence. If you are still awake, consider this. Endurance does not always transform a man into something gentler. Sometimes it simply makes him steadier. The sharp edges remain, but they are honed with purpose rather than anger. The past cannot be undone, but it can be integrated or woven into the architecture of who one becomes. Another year turns, another class graduates. They leave through the great doors into a world less fractured than the one their predecessors inherited. That, in itself, is victory enough. The torch is dim, the castle exhales, and I walk on, not as a relic of war, nor as a figure trapped in memory, but as part of the living structure, stone among stones, ward among wards, ensuring that when night falls, it finds Hogwarts prepared, and when morning comes, it finds it still standing. There comes a particular kind of night in early autumn when the air turns sharp without warning, and the castle seems to listen more intently than usual. The first years have only just learned the trick of navigating shifting staircases. The older students are reacquainting themselves with rivalries that feel comforting in their predictability. Candles float steadily beneath the enchanted ceiling, and the great hall smells faintly of parchment and roast pumpkin. It is on such a night that I sometimes permit myself a longer pause along the battlements. The Scottish sky stretches vast and indifferent above the turrets of Hogwarts. Constellations burn with cold precision. The forbidden forest lies like a dark tide at the edge of the grounds, its canopy whispering secrets in a language older than wands. The black lake mirrors the stars with deceptive calm, as though nothing malevolent had ever disturbed its depths. You are there again, are you not, listening? Perhaps the season is different where you are. Perhaps rain taps at your window, or traffic murmurs beyond thin glass. Perhaps you are far from any forest, any ancient stones, and yet you return here, to this castle suspended between memory and vigilance. It is a curious form of companionship, this unseen exchange. You remain in your world, I remain in mine. Still, the distance narrows in the quiet. Earlier this evening, I confiscated a charmed parchment from 2 second years, attempting to communicate answers during a quiz. Their enchantment was clumsy but inventive. I deducted points, of course. I assigned detention. Yet as I examined the spellwork, I recognized the spark beneath the mischief. Ingenuity misdirected is not the same as malice. It requires correction, not condemnation. Such distinctions matter. In the years since open war scarred these grounds, I have grown more attentive to the subtleties of intent. Darkness rarely announces itself with theatrical declarations. It creeps through grievance, through humiliation left to fester, through ambition untethered from restraint. I watch for those fissures now with greater care than I once did. A cutting word at the wrong moment can widen them. A measured silence can close them. Do not mistake this for softness. I remain exacting. Potions demand precision. They punish carelessness without prejudice. But where once I might have allowed humiliation to serve as lesson, I now prefer mastery to be its own rebuke. Competence builds fortifications that shame never could. The castle approves of this evolution, I think. The moving staircases hesitate less beneath my tread. The portraits, even those inclined toward gossip, lower their voices when I pass not from fear alone, but from recognition. The legacy of the founders endures not merely in relics and relic rooms, but in adaptation. 𝗕𝗲𝗏𝗃𝗀𝗀 prized wit, yet wit without wisdom fractures. 𝗕𝗲𝗃𝗀𝗏𝗃 valued loyalty, yet loyalty without discernment can be exploited. Godric Gryffindor championed bravery, yet bravery without foresight courts disaster. Even Salazar, Slytherin, so often reduced to caricature, understood the necessity of self-preservation in hostile times. The balance among these principles is what keeps the castle whole. A wind rises along the battlements, tugging at my robes. Somewhere in the distance, a student laughs bright, unburdened. It echoes across the courtyard and dissolves into the night. I find that I do not resent the sound. If you are still awake, consider what endures in your own life. Not the grand gestures or dramatic confrontations, but the habits, the small, repeated decisions. The choice to show up again. The decision to guard what matters, even when no one is watching. Especially when no one is watching. Below, the lights in the dormitory windows begin to extinguish one by one. The castle prepares for sleep. The wards shimmer faintly at the perimeter, layered and patient. I feel their rhythm align with my own breathing, a synchronization born of long familiarity. You may drift soon. That is well. The night does not require your vigilance. It requires mine. Let your thoughts soften. Let the imagined corridors fade into gentle shadow. Know that within these ancient walls, constancy prevails. The sentinel remains at his post, not driven now by desperation or divided allegiance, but by something quieter and far more durable. Commitment. The stars wheel overhead. The lake lies still. And as long as the castle stands against the dark, I will walk its edges, ensuring that when morning comes, it finds every tower intact and every student free to wake unafraid. Midwinter returns without asking permission. The castle tightens against the cold, its stones contracting with soft, nearly inaudible groans. Frost feathers across the windows of the dungeons, tracing fragile constellations that vanish at the first touch of daylight. The black lake darkens to iron beneath a low sky, and even the owls seem reluctant to leave the shelter of the owlery's rafters. Within Hogwarts, fires burn brighter, footsteps echo sharper, and the scent of pine from the great hall's holiday trees drifts faintly down the stairwells. The students grow restless as the term wanes. Anticipation hums through them of homecomings, of gifts, of reunions, unmarred by examinations or curfews. Some will leave tomorrow on the Hogwarts Express, chatter spilling over itself in the corridors at dawn. Others will remain, whether by necessity or preference, and discover that the castle in holiday quiet feels larger than ever. I have always preferred it that way. There is a clarity to a half-empty Hogwarts. The great hall, stripped of its usual din, becomes cathedral-like. The enchanted ceiling glows with slow-falling snow that never quite reaches the tables. The suits of armor stand as solemn as sentries. Even Peeves tempers his chaos, as though aware that too much noise would fracture the fragile peace of the season. Are you still listening? It is later now, I suspect. The world beyond your walls has quieted. Perhaps the lights in your building have winked out one by one. Perhaps you have drawn the covers closer, the air cool against your face. There is something about winter that invites reflection, whether one seeks it or not. Earlier this evening, I encountered a first-year lingering outside the library, long after curfew. He attempted composure when I addressed him, but his explanation faltered into silence. Home sickness, though he would not name it. The castle can be overwhelming in its grandeur, its shifting corridors and whispered histories. I deducted no points. I escorted him back to his dormitory with instructions curt, efficient in navigating the staircases more effectively. He will remember the tone, not the leniency. That is acceptable. In the days before the holidays, I often find myself recalibrating more than wards. The year's progress reveals itself in subtle ways. A once timid student answers questions without prompting. A habitual braggart learns restraint after a potion explodes spectacularly under his care. Growth here is rarely dramatic. It is incremental, like the slow thickening of ice along the lake's edge. The founders understood this rhythm. 𝗕𝗲𝗲𝗃𝗀𝗃𝗀 built kitchens that could feed hundreds through the harshest winters, trusting in patience and steady labor. 𝗕𝗲𝗃𝗀𝗃𝗀 designed towers that pierced the sky, knowing that intellect flourishes when given both solitude and height. Godric Gryffindor carved spaces for training, believing courage must be practiced, not presumed. Even Salazar Slytherin concealed chambers deep below, a testament to the belief that survival sometimes demands secrecy. Their philosophies converge in winter: endurance, preparation, restraint. Tonight, snow begins to fall in earnest. I watch from a narrow window as flakes gather on the battlements, softening sharp lines into gentler curves. The castle looks almost benevolent beneath such covering. Appearances, however, have never been my measure of truth. Beneath that snow lie scars in the stone, repaired, reinforced, but remembered. The wards respond differently in winter. Cold clarifies magic. It strips away excess and leaves structure exposed. I walk the perimeter slowly, gloved hands clasped behind my back, feeling for irregularities. There are none. The hum is steady, layered with years of refinement. Protection, once reactive, has become anticipatory. You may be drifting now. If so, let the image settle. Snow descending in silence over ancient towers. Torches casting warm halos against the cold. Corridors momentarily free of hurried footsteps. A sentinel moving through it all, not out of habit alone, but out of chosen constancy. When morning comes, the departing students will board the train in a flurry of scarves and promises to write. The castle will exhale, relieved of its noise. For a brief span, it will belong to fewer voices, and I will continue my circuits, ensuring that even in holiday quiet, nothing breaches these walls. Sleep, if you must. Winter will keep its watch outside. I will keep mine within. There is a moment just before The very last candle gutters out in the corridor. When the castle seems suspended between centuries, it is neither wholly past nor entirely present. The stones of Hogwarts hold the weight of founders and fools, of heroes and cowards, of children who arrived trembling and left transformed. And I stand within that suspension as I have stood so many nights before, aware that I am both temporary and, in some quiet way, woven into its permanence. The holidays have thinned the population of the castle to a hush. Snow lies thick across the grounds, smoothing the scars of old battles into gentle slopes of white. The Black Lake is a sheet of dark glass, reflecting the towers in elongated, wavering lines. From a distance, Hogwarts appears untouched by history's violence. Up close, the repairs are visible if one knows where to look. I always know where to look. The battlements have been reinforced where giants once struck. The courtyard stones were relaid after curses split them like brittle bone. The astronomy tower stands tall, though it remembers more than it reveals. Memory in this place is not sentimental, it is structural. It informs the angle of every wand raised in defense, the layering of every ward renewed at dusk. Tonight I make my final circuit before returning below. The torches burn low, but steady. The portraits does in their frames, their painted chests, rising and falling with borrowed breath. Even Peeves is absent, perhaps sulking in some forgotten alcove deprived of his usual audience. The castle's silence is not empty, it is composed. A symphony paused between movements, and you are here, still listening. I have grown accustomed to your presence and scene, unintrusive, yet persistent. You began this journey curious, perhaps seeking comfort in familiar corridors. Now you remain at the end, having walked winters and wars beside me. Wherever you are across oceans, beneath city lights, wrapped in blankets against your own cold eye, imagine the faint glow illuminating your ceiling has dimmed, your breathing has slowed. Before you drift fully, allow me one final recollection. There was a night long ago when I stood at a crossroads of allegiance and consequence. The air was thick with impending loss. Choices had narrowed to a blade's edge. I believed then that whatever remained of me would be consumed by the role I had agreed to play. I did not foresee survival. I did not anticipate years unfolding beyond that point, years of classrooms, detentions, corridor patrols, incremental rebuilding. Endurance, I discovered, is rarely dramatic. It is not the singular act that defines a life, but the sustained decision to remain. To continue teaching when grief would excuse withdrawal. To reinforce wards when trust has been fractured. To stand in the great hall beneath enchanted stars and survey rows of students who will never fully comprehend the cost of their safety. That ignorance is not failure, it is success. The founders built this castle with distinct philosophies: Godric Gryffindor's valor, Rowena Ravenclaw's intellect, Helga Hufflepuff's steadfast loyalty, Salazar Slytherin's cunning preservation. For centuries those principles have clashed and intertwined within these walls. I once embodied only one of them, to completely timed consequence, forced to reconciliation. Cunning without compassion corrodes, courage without calculation destroys. Loyalty without discernment blinds. Intellect without empathy isolates. Balance is the quiet triumph. The snow continues to fall, soft against stones. Somewhere deep in the dungeons, a cauldron ticks as it cools. In a dormitory tower, a lone student turns in sleep, unaware of the sentinel pacing below. The wards hum, layered with magic old and new, threaded now with my own precise adjustments. They will outlast me. That is as it should be. If you wake tomorrow with only fragments of this journey-an image of snow-lit towers, the echo of measured footsteps, the sense of watchfulness without menace, then it has served its purpose. Stories need not end with spectacle. Some conclude with steadiness. I pause once more at the highest window, looking out over grounds washed silver beneath the moon. For a fleeting instant, I allow myself neither regret nor justification, only acknowledgment. The path was flawed, the choices were costly. The vigil, however, endures. And now, listener, wherever you are, it is time. Set aside the glow. Let your room return to darkness. The castle does not require your wakefulness to persist. I will continue the rounds without you. The lake will press cool against the glass. The torches will burn and be replaced. Another generation will arrive at these doors, unaware of how many nights were spent ensuring they could sleep. Hogwarts stands. There is a moment just before the very last candle gutters out in the corridor, when the castle seems suspended between centuries. It is neither wholly past nor entirely present. The stones of Hogwarts hold the weight of founders and fools, of heroes and cowards, of children who arrived trembling and left transformed. And I stand within that suspension, as I have stood so many nights before, where that I am both temporary and in some quiet way woven into its permanence. The holidays have thinned the population of the castle to a hush. Snow lies thick across the grounds, smoothing the scars of old battles into gentle slopes of white. The black lake is a sheet of dark glass, reflecting the towers in elongated, wavering lines. From a distance, Hogwarts appears untouched by history's violence. Up close, the repairs are visible if one knows where to look. I have grown accustomed to your presence, unseen, unintrusive, yet persistent. You began this journey curious, perhaps seeking comfort in familiar corridors. Now you remain, at the end, having walked winters and wars beside me, wherever you are across oceans, beneath city lights, wrapped in blankets against your own cold eye. Imagine the faint glow illuminating your ceiling has dimmed, your breathing has slowed. Before you drift fully, allow me one final recollection. There was a night long ago when I stood at a crossroads of allegiance and consequence. The air was thick with impending loss. Choices had narrowed to a blade's edge. I believed then that whatever remained of me would be consumed by the role I had agreed to play. I did not foresee survival. I did not anticipate years unfolding beyond that point, years of classrooms, detentions, corridor patrols, incremental rebuilding. Endurance, I discovered, is rarely dramatic. It is not the singular act that defines a life, but the sustained decision to remain. To continue teaching when grief would excuse withdrawal. To reinforce wards when trust has been fractured. To stand in the great hall beneath enchanted stars and survey rows of students who will never fully comprehend the cost of their safety.